Welcome back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman. This is show number 50. We are in the middle of our second season, and we're going to take a right-hand turn and talk a little bit about streaming as it relates to high school lacrosse and other kinds of sports. There have been some complaints based on a subscription model that the National Federation for High School Network has produced along with the MHSAA.TV. And we've listened to some parents complain, and we thought we'd go right to the source. We're going to get a chance to talk to Mark Koski, who is the CEO of the National Federation of High School Sports Network, along with Geoff Kimmerly, who is the communications director of the MHSAA. We're going to discuss the culture of the programming and exactly what is going on at the network and what might be coming up in the future. It'll be a real insight because I think it opens some doors and open up some thought process in my brain as to where it's headed and exactly where it's gonna go. So stay tuned. You'll get a chance to listen to Mark Koski talking about the high school network, and I think you'll be quite surprised. We're talking with Mark Koski, who is the director and CEO of the National Federation High School Sports Network. Is that correct, Mark?
It is, yeah. Greg, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate this opportunity. Appreciate what you do in your state as well as nationally as well.
We wanted to talk about the rollout of the program. The program's been around now about 8 years. Am I correct?
Yep, we're just concluding our 8th year of the NFHS network.
You being appointed to the head of the organization, the network, was actually the caveat is that Jack Roberts was the head of the national board at the time that it came out. Jack is now a retired member. He was the executive director for a long time for the Michigan High School Athletic Association. So I guess I want to start with, you were there in the beginning. Kind of walk us through this briefly, walk us through the history. I know the Pixelot camera has been a big part of that rollout. The pandemic has certainly helped that process, and kind of give us a gist of where it was, where it might be going, and where we are now.
No, thanks, Greg. Again, I appreciate the question. You know, you talk about Jack Roberts. I owe a lot to Jack Roberts. This network owes a lot to Jack Roberts and the NFHS as a whole. He really was the individual with Bob Gardner, who is our executive director of the NFHS, were the two individuals that came together and really kind of developed, this kind of mastermind of this. And immediately they wanted to have some sort of network, high school sports network, whether it be linear on TV, whether it be streaming, but some sort of way to showcase all the great things that these students are doing. And so I know this story really well. About 10 years ago, those two individuals, met right between Indianapolis, and that's the home of the NFHS. And of course, right where, Jack was in Lansing. I think they met halfway at a truck stop somewhere, and on a napkin, they developed this plan. And so we immediately started to look for kind of a provider, a turnkey provider. And we went down to Atlanta and interviewed and partnered with Play On Sports, who was in the business for a number of years prior to that. And so the NFHS, Play On Sports joined together to form the NFHS network. As mentioned 8 years ago. The original thought, though, Greg, on the network was all about trying to get cable networks to pick it up, as well, and for us to take advantage of 1 cent nickel per subscriber. And that was going to be a great plan in terms of you have a great cable network that picks us up, and hey, we show all these games. The problem came is that on Tuesday night, when these great lacrosse games are happening, or Thursday, whatever it may be, how do we pick that one game at 7 o'clock Eastern time?
Right.
And as we know, there's 2 million high school events throughout all sports throughout the country each and every year, whether it be freshman, JV, varsity games. And we said, hey, in order for this really to work, in order for us to have 2 million events and show everyone, we're going to have to stream these games, because we can't really work with, TV network, because again, they're going to want that one game at 7, one game at 5, whatever it may be. And again, who are we to pick who that game is? But the network really thrives because this next year, we're going to have over 1 million games on the NFHS network. And each of those games mean just as much to us, and sometimes have the same number of subscribers, whether it's a freshman game, whether it's a big Friday night football game, varsity game, whether a huge lacrosse game. All of those mean just as much to us. And that's why the NFHS network was formed, was again to showcase every student within the high school setting.
I run a couple of small cable access stations here in Michigan, and our biggest viewing in the summertime is coach pitch softball. And we'll get 2,000 or 3,000 viewers to watch, 7-year-olds running around a field because it's grandpa and grandma and all the rest of it.
I love it. To that point, right? Sometimes we'll have games that will have 5 subscribers. We'll have games that'll have a few thousand. But the high school model, if you look at, you really care about the community you live in, where you went to school, maybe you have grandkids or someone involved. The high school model never has millions of people watching one particular game. That's not it. But the good thing is we have millions of games. And so you start multiplying that, and it ends up being a pretty successful network because of the amount of content that we have. And again, this next year, having over 1 million events will be a really, really good start to our ultimate goal of the 2 million we're trying to get to.
Where are you in saturation? Michigan has roughly 750 high schools. Where are you in general across the country in terms of saturation with the program? How many have signed up?
That's a great question. So 19,500 high schools nationally throughout the country. And we will be right over half of those at the end of the school year. And so we're at 50% there. And it kind of makes sense with our model being that there's 2 million events a year. We're going to have right at over 1 million this next year. And so, we have about 10,000 schools that have signed up on what's known as our school broadcast program. And, I take you back from day one. We had no pixel lock cameras, which are the automated cameras that really changed our business, that's helped us get all of those games. But prior to, it was all about school broadcast programs, so students doing the production, and we love that model. We still do. We love the schools that they teach those freshmen, those seniors, how to call play-by-play, how to run the camera, how to be the producer. That's what the NFHS network was formed from day one, to get those students behind the camera, in front of the camera, part of the action. Because most likely, Greg, those students were not coming off of our fields or our courts. These are students who were not a part of the action. So now, being that these students are part of the action, it gets more students involved, gets the community involved in a different way. So we still have those schools, but we do have more schools that's through our school broadcast program with the pixel lock units, and then truly no human needed whatsoever, because those cameras turn on 15 minutes before the game. They pick up all the action, including zooming in onto the coverage. And then, of course, they're connected to the scoreboard. So you as a fan can see exactly how much time's left on the clock, what the score may be. And that really has helped athletic directors so that they don't have to wrangle those students to come, on for a big Thursday night volleyball game, for example.
The camera is operated. Talk briefly. The actual camera lens follows the ball, which is why it's able to keep up with the action. Is that a fair?
Yeah, kind of the best way we put it is there's an algorithm in there. And what I mean by that is, if it's volleyball, for example, it knows it's a tight shot. If you look at, you're in the same place as basketball, but, volleyball court's a little narrower. So it knows it's volleyball, and what it actually follows is more of the movement of the play. And so, when you kind of come together in volleyball or lacrosse, it kind of knows through this algorithm, knows that people are together. And so it kind of will zoom in on that. That's where the ball is most likely. But then it also knows, and much smarter than any of us here, it knows to zoom out when that play is extended and the movement of the body is kind of extend out. And so you'll see, tell you what, 98% of the time on a big, football pass play, for example, you have the receiver that's downfield, literally it'll be spot on. And again, a great solution for schools that do not have enough students to run their school broadcast program.
Do you keep track of viewership? Is there a way to do that? Like at YouTube, you can keep track of, you've got X amount of people watching this show, that show. And my question is, if that's true, what seems to be the best viewership? What's your best audience?
Yeah, no, great question. So we do that because, we're a subscription model. It's $10.99 a month. Watch unlimited, the amount of coverage you want, not only for that game or that team or that school that you really like, but all the games that we've had on the NFHS network live, as well as in the past 8 years. We have such a history that you can go back and watch video on demand, an example. And so we thrive on, it's interesting, all events. And it's crazy to even say it. Sure, there's some freshman games that we might not have as many subscribers. But I tell you what, a lot of times it comes down to how many students are participating, because you start multiplying that by a couple of grandparents, aunts and uncles. Of course, you have casual fans. But what I love about the NFHS network and the system that we've created is that only about 80% of our subscribers are subscribing from outside of the state that the game is being played. And so,
Wow.
Yep, the concern from day one was all about, hey, as an athletic director, you're going to take our fans away from the stands. And we started to do a test. And again, we're finding out that 80% of subscribers are from outside. These are grandparents, aunts, and uncles in California and overseas. And we get crazy amounts of letters. They'll say, thanks so much for the NFHS network. I've been here in the Wharf for the last year. I've never seen my daughter play volleyball. And so we have those subscribers that really couldn't make it to the game. Sure, no question, this last year was a very unique year where, individuals couldn't come to the game. And I'm talking with that 80%, it's all prior to pandemic. But we have individuals now that, again, can watch this worldwide and make sure they're part of it. We're excited for the fall because we think all states will be back playing again 100%. Fans will be back. That's what high school sports are all about. Having the communities come together, have the student body that's cheering on their teammates. That's great. And the NFHS network, we want that to happen because we want to show those stands filled because it just electrifies everything that's happening within the venue itself.
Let me, just for background, the National Federation of High Schools does two things. It's a nonprofit organization. Athletics seems to be its forte, but you still get involved in forensics, debate, other school activities. So I think people need to know that. Now, your network is a for-profit. So you've been involved as a member of the staff of the National Federation. How will you switch hats from nonprofit to profit, and maybe explain the two and why that's important to understand that the network is a for-profit model?
No, that's a question. I tell you what, I feel like, 4 hours of every day, I'm thinking nonprofit, and 4 hours I'm thinking for-profit. But, when we designed the NFHS network, it was all for, again, most importantly, we want to get students covered. But it was also for the state associations to receive a rights fee for them to put towards their programming, their budgets, that they have. A lot of states 8 years ago, 10 years ago, they had TV deals that they worked with their local cable companies and channels, to produce their big championships. Well, that was great, but what we were finding is that only the big boys games were being covered. It wasn't a 50-50 like we have. Of our 1 million events next year, literally, because this is one of our missions, 50% of those events will be girls. 50% will be boys, period, the end. That is an important factor. It's not a football and basketball network. It's a network for high school sports and activities. And so we knew that through our state associations, they were starting to lose some of those TV deals. The money wasn't there. Again, they were really narrowing in on the, big school basketball or big school football only. They weren't covering all sports. And so we knew that this was a way. And actually, the NFHS network was modeled after the Big Ten network. We actually used the exact same attorneys that the Big Ten network did to put together their deal to where how it works is that state associations receive a rights fee each and every year. The NFHS actually doesn't receive a dime. We don't take 1 penny from the NFHS network. It's all given back to our member state associations, again, for them to use towards programming and ultimately put back into their schools and that are a good thing for students long-term and coaches and officials.
There have been some of the rollouts. There have been, if you go online, there have been some complaints because you're asking, in a lot of cases, the guy that runs the clock to also have to deal with the television, deal with the pixel camera. There's times when, and even in our own games, I've seen 45 minutes and the camera turns on, not just 15. So there have been some bumps going through this. I don't think that's a secret to you and certainly not to those. But aren't the local problems local and not necessarily the networks? That would be my first question. And if you don't have internet or you don't have strong internet at the stadium, which may not be as strong as it might be in school, those are all factors that you have to at least look at. Is that a fair question?
Very fair question. I tell you what, through the growth this year, we got caught a little bit. Last summer, I'm just going to give an example of our kind of overall head count. We had 15 individuals that were full-time employees in our support department. This time last summer, I'd say last July. And we had a little larger prior to, but with the pandemic, we think, okay, high school sports isn't coming back. Obviously, it ramped up faster than we ever imagined. And through what's known as our high school support program, where we offer 2 free Pixel-Lock cameras for every school throughout the country, it really took off like a rocket ship. Well, when that took off, Also does the phone calls. There's issues. Hey, you're in the streaming business. There's problems that technology. And so we have ramped up. We went from 15 last August 1st, 15 to 190 today. And it just full-time. So it just shows you to what level we have really tried to make sure it's a user experience. We always say, it might be your internet home. And we always try to, make sure that we figure it out for the subscriber, because they're paying for a service. They need to make sure they have a great service. So for $10.99 a month, we want to make sure that subscriber's happy, whether it's on our end, whether it's on their end. So we try to figure out the issue. But we want to keep those subscribers as long as we can. I mean, think of the Netflix model in terms of, hey, it's $10.99 a month. Our average subscriber lasts about 4.5 months, about a season, usually what it is. But how do we get them to 6 months, 10 months, long-term to be a subscriber, forever? And that's our goal. And so customer service really has been a forefront of our focus, and will continue to be this next year.
The question I want to ask, and it may or not be a fair question, answer or don't answer, but should state associations be in the business of making profit on the kinds of things they're making profits on, sweatshirts and television, or is that just the way the world is? And I say that with the
Greg, I think it's a great question. It's a fair question. I prior to working here at the NFHS here in Indianapolis, and you see kind of behind me on my Zoom background, that's a picture of our office. We're connected to the NCAA, but again, we're a nonprofit through and through. And state associations are nonprofits as well. However, I go back to my history here. 14 years here in Indianapolis. Prior to this, I worked for the New Mexico Activities Association in Albuquerque. And I've always been kind of in the marketing world. And the state associations, they live off of ticket sales each and every year. Ticket sales to their contests, about 75% of their budgets come from ticket sales. But the other has to come from corporate sponsorships, revenue, whether it be merchandise vendors and so on. So in order to provide the services in which they provide schools, to coaches, to officials, to administrators, in order for them to do that, they need to make sure that they have a budget as well. And so we wanted to make sure that we were a solution for them long term. So being that these cable companies in a sense were kind of dropping them or keeping just a few events on the network itself, we wanted to make sure that we had a way for them to bring in some sort of profit, again, to put back into their programming, for ultimately the benefit is for the students, the officials, and the coaches in which they serve on a daily basis. The
MHSAA.TV charges about $6 more for DVD than they do to the surrounding 5 states. And they just do. So I always throw the question out to the guys who run in the state: why are you $5 more expensive than everybody else? And I always get back, well, how would you know that? I said, because I go online, because that's what I do. Sure. I'm just asking the question. I said, can you show the profit line? Is it more expensive to make a DVD in Detroit, or in this case, East Lansing, than it is in Columbus? And never really get a good answer. And I think part of that process is, that's why we're having this discussion, to explain what it is. And I think if they could, sometimes associations are good and sometimes they don't. The follow-up question is that before almost every tournament game, there's a statement read by the announcer that basically says that this broadcast is copywritten, and it's for the broadcast of the generosity of the folks who are paying for it, and the rest of it. We have some guys that are streaming their own games with YOLO boxes and the things that come with the marketplace. How much enforcement? We've heard a lot. We know of a couple of schools that didn't do some copywritten plays down in Georgia, and both schools were charged $50,000 because every once in a while it's selective enforcement to keep everybody else in line. There's a lot of tournament stuff for lacrosse this past spring, that was being strung out by other folks. So talk a little bit about the enforcement and what mom and dad should be doing so that they comply with the rules, because the FCC is pretty tough.
Yeah, no, it is. I tell you what, and I feel like copyright has come up more over the last couple of years than it did, prior to forever. It's such kind of a newer, not that it's new, but a topic. It's definitely high on the forefront. And so, it's interesting. When we work with schools, and I'd mentioned, a little over half of the schools in the country are part of the NFHS network. they either come to us or we come to them. Obviously, our goal is to get to 19,500, but they're looking for some sort of solution. And when they sign with the NFHS network, they're excited about that because they can get, we give them 10% of the revenue goes back. All of the advertising goes back to the school itself. And so I think they're looking for some sort of revenue model, to help them not only promote their games and put their great students part of our platform. But to that said, the enforcement, of mom and dad and fan, into the gymnasium. A lot of times, again, to the schools that we work with, they like our service because it's through the NFHS network. It's the exclusive, streaming broadcast, and it gets them kind of out of that world a little bit. Now, again, a little under half the schools in the country are not part of it, and they are trying to figure out a solution. Whether mom and dad is streaming on their own camera, whether nowadays we all have a cell phone, we can stream off of a cell phone. Those are all ways. But I tell you what, I think I know the schools that we work with have been very pleased when it comes to being able to have a solution so that they hopefully do not get into the copyright issues when it comes to outside folks or parents, fans, streaming these games.
Rural, suburban, urban. Is there a model? Is there one group that's more involved than others? Is it suburban more than the city, more than the farm country?
Yeah, I tell you what, outside of the city does really well for us. And I don't know if it's the enthusiasm, that they have just for high school sports and the community coming together and find a solution, but or how folks grow up that they always, hey, high school is really big versus you come to the cities and hey, there's a professional, NBA game going on tonight. There's so much happening. I tell you, we love all schools, there's no question, but we love those communities when they come together to rally behind, those lacrosse teams. And that's what high school is all about, the community sense. And we hope that, it will continue. Obviously us being right next door to the NCAA, they had big news yesterday, and we're really happy to be working in the high school world and try to protect, what we've had, for 102 years. When the NFHS was founded, and our goal is to maintain that for the next 100.
You may have to worry about looking out the window, see if the building isn't burning the way we listened to some stuff about the NCAA here. Side note, you do. I just briefly, and I know we're on about a 4-minute window. I want to get you off because you've got a meeting to go to, and I appreciate your time. You do. The federation is involved in debate, forensics, and a number of other extracurricular activities. Do you broadcast any of their activities?
And we do. And so our model is sporting events, you pay the $10.99 for. Any non-athletic event, free to watch 100%. And we have speech and debate, music, drama, band, cheer and dance. All of those are part of our model. Again, free to watch as a consumer. And we love it. What's crazy, last year and this year too, graduations are one of our most watched events. Again, free on the NFHS network. We've had biology classes broadcasting the chickens hatching, where they have a camera that's in there, and eventually, it's unbelievable. But I tell you what, we love it because it's within the walls of high school, and that's what it should be. And so we're proud that we can offer a solution for schools and parents, and again, those fans that can't make it to the game. We're proud that we can offer them a solution to be part of that action that they wouldn't have been able to be at.
This past. We have Huddle Assist as part of our lacrosse program. And I was amazed that you guys were about an hour and a half where I'd get a kickback so I could actually watch the video versus my Huddle download, which took probably 3 hours. His stats back. So you're actually quicker. Last question. What is you're kind of planning coming up in the fall? What's going to be new for 2021-22 school year?
Well, I tell you what, to make sure that, those 190, plus employees on the customer service team are ready to go, that's important. We want to make sure that there's a number for athletic directors that they can call. They know exactly who to go to. That's huge for us because a lot of times you only have one shot, and that one shot will tell their 4 best friends whether it's a great product or not. And so we need to make sure customer service is ready to go. Tech support, of course, the technology business is always changing. And, as internet gets better and cameras get better and so on. That's important. And, how do we cover these 1 million games with minimal issues? Always is our ultimate goal, again, for the fan to make sure they have a great experience, and for the student to be able to go back and be able to watch him or herself, long term. And so, all those fibs that Greg, you and I tell about our high school career, nowadays those kids can't tell them anymore because there's video that proves whether they did really well or really bad. I'm glad that, hey, my decathlons aren't part of the NFHS network, because, I can fib to my sons and my wife of how great I was. Couldn't do that nowadays.
And I'm really old, so I can really lie because it's way far back before there was only 3 stations in television. So I get that. I think to wrap it up, I think the other thing that, and maybe just touch on this briefly, if you really do have a complaint with your service, it's really talk to your athletic director, talk to the school first and see what it might be. And there may be a thousand variables that you guys have no understanding of because you don't live in that area. And you're providing a broadband service that is not just, you can't complain in East Lansing and in Albuquerque and any place else. It's something you got to take a look at. Is that fair?
Because what we see is a lot of times it's like buffering issues is what works at one home, but it doesn't work on another home. So yeah, no question. We appreciate that. Not that we're trying to, not get those calls, but go to the athletic director to see, hey, is there an issue here in terms of maybe it's mine, but it could be on the NFHS network. And then that athletic director, he or her, will have a bat line, so to speak, to Atlanta, where our NFHS network offices are, to make sure we can clean up and make sure that it's successful long term.
Cool. Mark, thanks so much for your time. I think this has given us a much better insight of what goes on with the Federation, and just so they can understand what service you're providing.
Hey, thank you, Greg. Appreciate what you do, locally as well as nationally. Anytime that you need us to get on there, even those tough questions, we're happy to answer. And again, ultimately find solutions so it ends up being the most powerful network in the country.
It was Mark Koski from the National Federation of High School Sports Network, and talking a little bit about this process of the national streaming programs that have been provided by the Federation. And up next, we're going to get a chance to talk to Geoff Kimmerly to kind of bring a local angle to it. He is the communications director for the MHSAA, and I think he'll give us a local spin as to how it works and give you some insight to what exactly goes on. We're talking with Geoff Kimmerly, who is the communications director for the MHSAA. I always say that acronym slowly so that we can understand it. Geoff, we're talking a little bit today about the National Federation of High School Network, of which the MHSAA.TV is a part of that whole process. Maybe you could just explain in sort of definition form where the Michigan high school television program fits into the National Federation program and how it kind of works.
So I believe we were one of the first states to have any kind of school broadcast program. Obviously, my predecessor, John Johnston, was really into the broadcast side of things. That was, even more than just a job for him. It was really kind of an avocation, if you will, a hobby, just something he was very interested in. So he was very involved with us becoming a national leader in terms of broadcasting, especially our finals and things like that. In the mid 2000s, we really had the beginnings of a push to get schools involved with broadcasting their events. At one point, really delivering the equipment for them to use. I think John did a lot of training with schools. At that point, it was really a lot of students involved in programs within their schools. Then the NFHS network came on about a decade later in some forms. And Jack Roberts, our executive director for 30 plus years, actually was, I believe, the first president of the network. So we had a very significant impact on the direction of that network. John, again, having as Jack's communication director for almost all 30 of those years, 32 of those years, I believe, having a significant influence there. So a lot of what happens there, at least started with what we do in Michigan. Things have changed significantly. There are not nearly as many student groups doing broadcasts at their schools anymore. We still have some very good ones, but they're very few compared to what there were even a decade ago. At the same time, the network has grown substantially. Really what they want to become is the place to be able to catch all high school sports action across the country, especially, not only for people that live in those communities, but for people that don't live in those communities and want to catch up with their schools and their families and things like that. So Michigan has about 400 schools in the network. We are, I believe, third in the country in terms of those pixel lock cameras you hear a lot about. They're kind of a robotic camera that does some automatic broadcasting, if you will. And I think we had something like, for example, we're talking lacrosse. For our finals this year, we had nearly 12,000 live views for those 4 games, which is significant when you consider, the audience, the live audience for those games is probably pretty similar to that. And that was with COVID restrictions off. So it's becoming a presence in Michigan. It really started a lot in the northern Lower Peninsula. It was pretty strong, those small communities up there. I think because they just didn't have a lot of the other coverage. And really it's making its way into schools all over the state. And, obviously there are some things that the network's working through, and we do our best to support it while also making sure they realize that our schools have concerns from time to time. But compared to what we had 15 years ago, it's unbelievable when you go from nothing to what it is now.
If there are roughly 750 high schools in Michigan?
Yes, I think 751 is our current number, something like that.
If you've got 400, you're certainly a little bit ahead of the average. There are 19,500 national programs, and we're talking with Mark Koski, who is the network's director and CEO, said that roughly about half of that, about 10,000 are signed up for it. I think some of that, you point out that Northern Michigan was a part of that discussion. If you watch in the fall and in the winter a sports broadcast from a local TV station on Friday night in Detroit, you get Lions and Tigers and Red Wings sports. If you watch in Grand Rapids and Traverse City, it's a culmination of 46 basketball games that they've covered, or football games. I think that changes part of that. Did the pandemic, did it accelerate the program a little bit?
I think so. At least it accelerated the interest in it, and what the network was able to do to maybe provide an extra opportunity there for people to watch their local schools or their families. Obviously, all of our schools had some sort of spectator limitations at some point or another for most of the school year, frankly. And the network stepped in, did some things in terms of, again, because we don't have a lot of students doing these programs anymore, did a lot to provide these pixel lock cameras at a substantially lower price, giving them away for free with just installation costs, doing some other things that way to make it as beneficial for schools as possible to get them on the network. To help the network, of course, but it did a lot for getting people the opportunity to see games. It was interesting. I think that expectation got there where everybody had these. And so you would hear from tournament games that weren't broadcast, and people would say, well, why wasn't this game on? How are grandparents supposed to watch things like that? Well, now they can go back to the game, if they live here. But definitely people realized that was an option as we went along during the school year.
I want to touch on the technology, but one of the things you mentioned earlier is that there's a lot of schools that no longer have broadcast groups. Is that partly because maybe schools aren't teaching broadcast television as a curriculum?
Well, sure. I think that's part of it. I think part of that, though, is also interest. Again, we have some schools, Lake Orion is an example that is significant. They were the National School Broadcast Program of the Year a few years ago. What they do is incredible. Rockford, Montrose, we have Cedar Springs. I don't want to leave anybody out. We have a handful of really strong student ones, even like smaller schools like McBain, places like that. But again, you have to have a group of students that's really interested in doing that, sustaining it across graduating classes, just like any athletic program, really. And so we just don't have that like we did. Partly, I think it's not part of the curriculum. I don't think the curriculum has it, though, because there's not enough student interest necessarily to support it. It would be awesome if it turned around and went the other way. I don't know that that's going to happen necessarily, but that has led us to have more of this automated digital platform where, to be honest, it's come a long, long way, but there's still ways to go. And I think everybody acknowledges that. But again, it's better than not having anything, which is, what we had not that long ago.
The technology is coming along. Sometimes the bouncing ball, which is what Pixelot works off of, sometimes
Sure.
it'll catch a bird flying, and all of a sudden the camera will fly out. One of the things I don't want to dwell on, some of the complaints that some of the parents have had. They pay a subscription fee. They think it should be CBS. It's not.
Right.
And I think that's important. I think that's important to understand. And if high school kids are running some of those programs, there's also pilot error that you have to factor in because they're high school kids. I mean, I get that. I run a cable access station in northern Oakland County with an entirely high school staff.
Mm-hmm.
So there are times when there are things that don't happen. Is part of that going back to it's a new technology. You might ask the guy running the score clock to also run the camera. And you're asking, sometimes as we talked earlier, sometimes you have really strong athletic directors and sometimes you don't. So is it a learning curve at this point?
Absolutely. And sometimes it's, it can be, and I don't even know if it's the strength of an athletic director so much as they have so many other things to do. And sometimes this is probably last on the list. Yeah. And understandably so. They're worrying about the teams competing. They're worrying about the stands or the fans in the stands. If the camera is running correctly, it's probably about 7th on a list of 5 sometimes. And that makes a lot of sense. Right. But it's also about, having just somebody in the school invested in it, obviously. It's a tough thing because there can be so many different things, as in a broadcast that can go wrong. You can get 9 right, and if one's wrong, then things get thrown off. But we're already on newer versions of these. I keep calling them Pixelots, and I don't know if people understand what that is, but that's the name of these cameras that are multi-lens that follow motion. Like you said, sometimes they get caught on the bird flying by. But 98% of the time they are following the action. So people will, as they do in anything, they'll find the one thing that's a mistake and they'll follow that and they'll really emphasize it. But for the most part, it's pretty decent. I've watched my share of a variety of sports that have been done on that. And for the most part, it's pretty good. And for $10.99 a month, which is about 2 games going to them live, it's really not a bad deal, especially when you consider that, I don't know that we have that many people that watch events from all over the country, which is what you get for your $10.99. But especially our championship weekends, when you can watch every division of 2 or 3 sports, if you'd like, it's really a pretty good deal. And if things do go wrong, the network is pretty quick to give refunds. We set as many people up as we need to with the right information to do that. And I think everyone acknowledges that we still have, places to go with this thing. But, compared to maybe not having something or what we've seen a lot of, people are just like holding up their phones trying to catch a game and, Facebook Live it to people. I would much rather have what the network provides at this point.
Does the state get a lot of direct complaints from users?
I wouldn't say it's a lot. I would say it's a handful, and we address them, and we, it's the customer is right, in these situations, and we get them to the network, and the network takes care of the refund. There's some disappointment there, obviously, when you can't watch the game, but we also make these games available for download. We don't even do DVDs anymore. People can go on the network if they want to buy a game, and they have the download for life, and they can take it wherever and record it to whatever and send it to whatever. So, do we get complaints? Yeah, a few, but I really believe it's only a few here, here and there. And generally we work on correcting those as much as we can. And a lot of it is stuff that we have to send directly to the network, but the network itself, I don't know that they realized how much interest would come in the last year. They've increased their support staff alone. It's something like 1,000%, just because people jumped on this like crazy, because this is their only way to get these events out live. So they're doing things to try to improve this. We're, of course, giving our input and our frustrations. They listen, and we work from there. It really is a partnership situation.
Part of the complaint process, and a briefly thing, that's why we're doing these interviews. There have been some who've complained, and I've listened to those guys, and they've decided to stream their own programming and put it on. Well, before every event, there's an announcement by the announcer that says this is a copywritten broadcast, and you can't copy it, nor can you put it up online. And I think of schools that get charged for not following when they want to do a school play and they don't buy the rights to a particular. And once in a while, somebody gets charged because they got to enforce it from time to time. And I don't think there's an enforcement cop walking around, but it is your copywritten show. And I think people should understand that they have to be a little careful on how they record it and where they play it back. Is that fair?
Absolutely. This is content that belongs to our schools. Our schools receive money from the subscriptions that come in to watch these events. When somebody is filming from the stands, they're taking money away from their local athletic department. And they're taking money away from schools. The schools have the ability to decide how these things are going to be broadcast. This is all in their hands. I know from our standpoint, and my predecessor, he would watch on Friday nights. He would watch Facebook Live's map and try and find people. We weren't sending, the stream police out to get them, but he would be sending the messages on Facebook saying, cease and desist. We see what you're doing. You need to stop. A lot of times people would do this without having any idea that it was against the rules, even despite those announcements. But you wouldn't have somebody going to a Michigan State football game and pulling out their phone and live streaming that. This is no different. This is content that belongs to the schools and as a partnership to the network, which sends money back to these schools. And it's something that, I as we get more into a technological world, which we're surely already there, but more and more people are doing these things. I'm sure we'll have a lot of misunderstandings, especially into the fall this year, because of what we basically allowed this past school year, which was everybody to do everything just to get something out there. But we'll get along to the point where we all understand, we'll move forward to get everybody on the same page, and that'll just take a little bit of time.
And talking with the FCC Enforcement Division, one of the things the guy was mentioning was that every once in a while they'll find somebody and prosecute them just as a deterrent, so they can, and they say they almost do it by region. So about every 5 years they have to go to a region to make sure that a particular high school, and they usually work it out, but part of it goes back to the same process. The MHSAA, okay, let me back up a little bit. The National Federation is nonprofit, but the network is a for-profit organization. Now, is MHSAA.TV also for-profit as much as the MHSAA.com is not a for-profit?
So everything that comes into the MHSAA goes into our nonprofit umbrella.
Okay.
Any money we get from the federation, as one of its producing members, just becomes part of our nonprofit budget. Again, some of that money goes back to the schools directly.
Okay.
So whereas, yes, the federation network is making money, it's still sending that money back to the states, state associations. As far as the MHSAA goes, we're still, completely nonprofit, and that just goes into the money that we receive otherwise for selling tickets and things like that.
Our state association television network is not a for-profit company trying to build a network and profits for stockholders. I guess
we don't have anything. Our stockholders are our schools,
right? And I think that's important. Is there something in the next, if something Mark was talking about, maybe some new technology? Have you guys been talking about anything for statewide that?
As far as the technological thing, I'm not totally sure there's anything new coming down the road that I know about. Like I said, those cameras are improving. Even if you look at the ones that are going out now, they are different than the ones that went out a few years ago. And I think that's just something they'll continue to build on. They're continuing to try and hone those or sharpen those, really improve that, a lot of the following the correct motion, things like that. So, they do things like allow you to plug in your radio broadcast. There's a score bug at the bottom that allows you to plug into your scoreboard and have that data go back and forth. I think those are some of the things that he's probably referring to, improvements that are coming, because I know there's going to be another big push to get more schools involved in this. Obviously, we would love to have everybody involved in at least in their gyms or on their main, football, lacrosse, soccer playing surface, if they use one for all of them, or however it works. So
in general, what's been the gist of why athletic directors, the other 350 high schools, what's been their answers to why they haven't installed?
I think a lot of times it's just the fact that there's a lot of other things going on.
Okay.
Frankly, some districts, I know that they have, maybe their own local broadcast programs set up that are through, a local cable access company, something like that. And that's the way they want to do things. And that's totally, and maybe there's not that crossover there like there are in other communities. There's just a variety of different reasons. Obviously, some people have heard complaints and they just, maybe don't want to deal with that. And those are people we have to convince to stay, and convince, that we're moving in the right direction and the network is trying to improve things. I'm sure that's part of it too, but we're still at a place, although it's important to have these things online, what an AD on the ground has going on a game day, is pretty significant. And these are people that are doing it 6 nights a week, and the broadcast stuff, I'm sure, is down at the bottom of that list.
The other thing too is that sometimes a lot of those athletic directors also have assistant principal titles to their
Absolutely
moniker, and it's not just necessarily making sure the buses run. Last couple questions. You
Yeah.
mentioned something earlier that there's no more DVDs. So was all of the old stuff archived then, I'm assuming?
We're in a way, we inherited a few giant file cabinets of DVDs from John Johnson, and so we are organizing those. We have a new broadcast person named John Ross who is working on that as we speak. We've actually, what John's done a lot of in the first few months he's been here, in addition to helping run a ton of tournaments in the middle of a pandemic, it's put a lot of those broadcasts online. Basically, anytime we have gotten the request for a championship broadcast over the last probably 5 or 6 months, he's put it on our YouTube channel. So there are tons of games, and John had put a ton on last summer, when we kind of were in the middle of a break in the action. So if you are going there, you're going to see that library has increased significantly. Eventually we'd love to have everything there that is, pre-network. Everything that the network has done is on demand archived. Everything before that, whether it was on Fox, now Bally Sports, or on Pass, or on the kind of the predecessors to the network, we have the majority of those things on some sort of hard copy, and we're trying to get those onto the network. So or onto our YouTube, I'm sorry. It's a pretty cool thing. There are some other states that have done that. Illinois is one, I believe, that has put almost everything they have on their YouTube, and it's very popular. And it's kind of fun. We hear from people from all over the country who are going back and watching themselves play 20 years later, and catching up with other people in their community and things like that. And that's what we're doing this for. That's kind of the beauty of what we do every day.
Yeah. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time. You've kind of given us a local flavor as to how things fit. And
Sure.
I think Mark and you, I think we've got a good conversation. We've had a couple of athletic directors who've interviewed for the same show. Just trying to give a path to what's accurate and kind of get away from some of the Twitter discussion that isn't always as accurate as it needs to be. But
yeah, and I think, again, at the end of the day, we all understand that there are improvements that need to be made. This is an emerging technology, if you will. It's an emerging way of watching events. Again, think about the fact that when we were growing up, this did not exist whatsoever. All of my high school highlights are on a VHS tape that I don't even know if it still runs in the VCR anymore. This is a new world, and we need to remember that, it's not going to all come at once. We understand there's frustrations out there. We feel the frustrations too, but we are doing our best to listen to our schools and work with the network and continue to do things better. And, when this thing is really said and done, I mean, we had 1 million live views of mostly championship events over the last school year. That could just be, scratching the surface of what this could look like. And that's really exciting because it's an opportunity that just really wasn't there before. And we're going to do our best to make it look the best and serve our schools and our families as well as we can.
With all the 221 championships done, great. I would say, catch your breath. You got 222 coming at you with a little bit different world. And I thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.